All right, awesome. Welcome to the Cool Data Project Show. I am Kristen Kerr, and I interview practitioners in ML, DL, and AI about interesting projects that they're working on. Today, I am so excited to be speaking with my friend Joe Reis, who
Hi.
recently wrote the book Fundamentals of Data Engineering and is a co-founder of Ternary Data. Joe, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what's new at Ternary Data?
Yeah, I'm Joe. Wrote a book, as you said. Been in the data space for a long time. What else here? Call myself a recovering data scientist. It's kind of how I got into data engineering out of necessity, basically. And several years ago, co-founded Ternary Data, a data engineering and data architecture consulting firm with Matt Housley, my co-author of Fundamentals of Data Engineering. And what's new with that? I think that what it's the old saying, what got you here won't get you there. So we started out as a typical services firm doing servicey things and moved into consulting, more kind of advice-based consulting, and that part still remains. But I think due to the in no small part to the success of the book and other opportunities we have in front of us, we're definitely de-emphasizing the services part and maybe taking on fewer consulting clients. We're very picky about who we work with, and so we have massive amount of inbound interest, which means we just have to be more picky, and we're more leveraging more of that into workshops. We feel like really we can help more data engineers and data teams and companies by helping level up their knowledge and competencies, versus us going in and doing the work for them. I don't think there's any shortage of competent people out there, but there could be more. And we also feel like the knowledge gap is really the biggest gap that we see in most data teams. It's so if we can help people better execute and then learn how to be better versions of themselves, I think that we'll call that a win. And so that's really the change of focus for us versus in the past us going in and doing the work for you. We want to more teach you how to do it yourself. So
No, that's awesome, and that'll help a lot of people. Congrats
yeah.
on the new direction. Do you have like specific topics that you want to be able to do in your workshops?
I mean, obviously, we will cover a lot of the basics of data engineering as we talk about in the book, but so we can obviously provide the kind of the standard data engineering workshops. We'll just get you up to speed, according to the principles of the data engineering lifecycle and the undercurrents as we outlined in our book. But if you want to work with us in a custom workshop manner or trainings, we can certainly do that as well. So I think it's a recognition, if we could dive into that for a second, that I feel like if you look at the nature of what consulting is, it's basically knowledge arbitrage at the end of the day. Like you might know something slightly better than I do, or maybe far deeper than I do, but at the end of the day, that knowledge, if you can disseminate that, and I think help teams again become better versions of themselves and become stronger than that, I think is a net win. If you contrast that with a typical kind of services engagement, right, where you come in as a contractor and you're doing work, what I've observed is it can go one of two ways. Either the team really accepts you and it's great and you get your work done and everything moves pretty smooth sailing. On the other hand, the other alternative is the team really views you as somewhat of a competition to them.
Yep.
Right. And a higher paid version of that. So they find every reason for you to
Mhm.
be a terrible, sucky person. And, so I think even early on in Ternary, Matt and I realized that the jujitsu move was really, why not help data teams feel like we're helping them become more awesome at what they do, versus, coming in and, competing with them. And so that's a tack we took early, but I would say just because of where we are now with being more notarized as, kind of quote, thought leaders or whatever you want to call it. I kind of hate that term, but people who have at least shared knowledge with the world, then why not lean into that better? So it makes everybody happier, including us. So
No, I've
yep.
seen that in a number of ways. I remember working on a consulting project before where I was going to build a model, and the company I was consulting for was going to get the data, and the person who was gathering the data for us literally said, if I'm going to get the data for you, why don't I just do this myself?
Right.
And I completely understand where she was coming from, because she was going to do all this work to get all this data, and then I was going to take the sexy part and be able to present it back to the business, which is sort of what everyone's looking for. And there was a lot of tension there. But I've also seen, I did another consulting project where at the end I actually went in and taught people how to, interpret the features, how to retrain the model and stuff like that. And the relationship was just like completely different. And I left that project feeling way more fulfilled than I did when I left work the day where the girl was like, why would I do that for you?
Right. Yeah. You get it.
I get it. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So moving over to what I really want to talk about today, which I know you're an expert in, is just sort of, I want to get an understanding of that space where a data scientist could really benefit from understanding some data engineering principles. So I'm talking about the person who has like no desire to become a data engineer, no offense. But I know, I'm just playing. But for the person who is like working at a sizable organization, right? So not at the small startup where they really are sort of trying to wear all the hats, but where somebody's role is pretty well defined, and they're maybe building models in notebooks, or they're not really aware of like CI/CD or like the whole pipeline. What do you think would benefit a data scientist to know about data engineering?
I think that I can speak to this because I pointed out, I call myself a recovering data scientist, quote unquote. But it's a recognition that when you're hired as a data scientist, typically you're expected to come in and this is, I think, especially poignant in the past. Maybe it's less so now because people are a bit more realistic. But back in the day, for example, data scientists were expected to be these magical unicorns that would come in and do everything, and they would. I think there's a lot of pressure on data scientists, but if you look at how data scientists are trained, right? Typically, it's some ML, some analytics, right? But that's on that that assumes you're sitting on top of a foundation, right? Of when I'm talking about a foundation, I'm talking about things
data
like
to go get. Yeah.
there's data for one, right? Sometimes there's not, and then also the foundations of data availability and delivery and so forth, right? And quality and reliability and all this other stuff. And so in a perfect world, the litmus test I would use if I'm a data scientist is, am I spending, there's the old trope, like, a data scientist spend 80-90% of the time getting and cleaning data. So if you find yourself doing that, I would argue that you should learn the principles of data engineering, or better yet, just go get a data engineer. Because ideally, as a data scientist, you should be spending 80-90% of your time doing what you're trained to do and what the business asks you to do, which is typically a lot of exploratory data analysis and understanding the data and leveraging the data using the skills you have, whether that's analysis, creating ML models and so forth, right? That is the training of I see in most data science programs these days, and I think that's what most data scientists are excited to do. But the reality is, a lot of data scientists get into their jobs and they're sort of like, WTF, this isn't what I signed up for. This is against the backdrop of everyone sort of warning data scientists that you're going to spend all your time cleaning data and getting data, and they're like, oh no, that won't be me. So it's reminds me of those old anti-drug movies or videos or something, or posters where oh, I'm never going to look like that crackhead on the poster. Yeah, and you're just like, yep, that's me. So that's I think that's just a reality of it, and it's a sad reality because you'd think that data science has been popular for over 10 years now, probably a bit longer, depending on how far you want to go back. But there was the old Drew Conway Venn diagram of data science back in the day, and I think that's one version of it. But data science, I think has come to mean a lot of things to a lot of people. Like, how would you define data science if I were to ask you that?
I mean, well, when you mentioned the Venn diagram, I sort of shudder because I don't know, it just always sort of didn't seem to really capture all of what data science is supposed to be. But I think I think today, and it's been a roller coaster for me. And I think at one point, like the data scientist role seemed, like it was becoming this sort of more technical piece, and then the ML engineer title
Yeah.
became more popular, and so it sort of seemed to sit down. But I mean, today I think that it's anyone who is doing analysis for the business and trying to find insights, and is maybe managing hypothesis tests and occasionally building models, and that models aren't necessarily like a big part. But
Mhm.
when I was a data scientist, it was like 2 or 3 times a year I'd have a cool use case for building a
Yeah.
model. um,
But you knew when to use the techniques too, and which techniques would apply, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, because I was really fortunate. And I feel like that's one thing too that we don't see anymore is like my first job out of grad school, I finished a master's degree in statistics, and then I was doing time series analysis and econometric time series analysis and forecasting. So it was ARIMAs and neural nets
mm,
that I was building. And this was like 2010, 2011. But I had a mentor, like my boss had a PhD in econometrics and knew
mm,
that I didn't even get a chance to take time series in my master's degree. But because I had the foundation, he was willing to work with me. And it was really hard to find somebody with that skill set, especially 13 years ago. And now it's really changed, that they sort of want you to have this skill set. And one of the things that I have difficulty with is like, had I mean, because in school, you just learn technique after technique after technique, and you're trying to keep up with, okay, what are the differences between when I apply this one versus when I
yeah.
apply this one? And, the idea of coming out of school today and like not having that mentor, I feel like I would have really struggled I learned the like techniques that we apply to most business use cases by watching other people on teams apply those techniques and then say, okay, yes, right, this is the technique that we
Yep.
want to use in this case. And sure, like I had the book knowledge, but like where I really saw it was from seeing other people utilize these techniques.
Mhm. Absolutely. And it's interesting because I feel like a lot of data science programs, the way they're taught now too, they do teach you a bunch of techniques, but they don't really give you the context in which they're useful and when you'd want to apply
Exactly.
them, right? And then the other thing I think it's missing, and I was talking to a university about this several months ago, but it feels like the notion of talking to quote the business and understanding what they want and kind of teasing out requirements, that's an art that I wish would be taught more because um, it helps you understand and triangulate like where you'd want to use certain techniques, for example. Or maybe it's not a question of techniques at all. Maybe it's not a question of anything. It's like because it's like sometimes the best answer is none of these apply, and we need to further discuss things like scoping, for example, right? I think that's because all too often, especially if you're a young data scientist, not young, but maybe junior or new in your careers, you want to jump into using the things that you were learning and excited to learn about, and I think that's cool. More power to you, but you also need to understand the limitations of um or the boundaries upon when it's appropriate to entertain these ideas, and also the limitations of their effectiveness um in the broader context of the problem you're trying to solve in the organization you're trying to apply them into. And so having that sense of reading the room, for example, and I think understanding the broader context in which you're doing your job is something I wish more schools would teach and more programs would emphasize. It's something that's severely underrated. And what I often see with data scientists when they get their job is they're horribly frustrated. They're like, "This isn't what I signed up for. The data is really dirty. Um, I'm I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's called having a real job." You know.
Yeah. No, but I've
Well,
seen people. Oh, sorry.
no,
Continue.
no. I mean, but that's just the reality of it. That's all I
Yeah.
can say. So.
Well, but I'll see people get right out of school and they'll be embedded on a team where they are reporting directly up through marketing, right? And they just get bowled over because they don't, you almost, data science is a support function. So you almost need like a gatekeeper that is working on your behalf when you start getting these like ad hoc requests. Or I know I heard you say the other day that you don't like the word value anymore, but when you get
I was
these
kind of joking, but not really. So
I'm like, how do I even spin this? I don't know. But I've seen people fail in their roles because they are just not given the support. And a lot of what you're talking about when we're talking about this working with the business is actually probably process that's just not actually put in place.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm speaking at Babson in 2 weeks,
Nice.
and
That's cool.
the theme of the talk is really around, how do you present to stakeholders in a way that is going to, help build trust and
Mm.
really get that message across, partially because when I graduated from school, it was, you talk about methodology, your results, which is, coefficients and p-values, and your results. And, then you get to business and realize that it's nothing like that that's going to allow you to be successful or whatever. But yeah, so I think universities are starting to really notice that that is something that they don't necessarily have being covered in their curriculum, and also that it's important. But then the question is just sort of like, I mean, because you can implement process like in every little piece, and how you work with your stakeholders and how you even do presentations, right? And it's like all this training that currently people are learning from, trials and tribulations.
Right. It's a tricky one, right? And I think it also speaks to the immaturity of the data field to some extent. And it's not a knock on data; it's just a young field. And I think when you and I got into it, and definitely when I got into it, it wasn't the cool thing to do, right? I mean, but back then, I think we were actually more effective because we were just kind of embedded with domains, um, or departments, and just doing our job. And you wouldn't use the word data typically. You would just say like, I just need to um, help move this part of the business along according to whatever goals we happen to have, right? But I think it's all. I think that the way we talk about data and put up on a pedestal actually is somewhat of an impediment in some ways to um, it getting progress in the business, because now data is seen as somewhat distinct from the business, whereas back in the day I don't think it was much of the case, right? You would just be solving problems and you'd move on your merry way and solve other problems. At least it's my experience. And um, whereas now I think that it seems like there's a lot of expectations that, oh, data's the it'll change everything for us. I'm like, well, it only changes everything in the context in which you're trying to change, right?
Yeah,
And
the
the support you're given to
expectations.
make the change, and the recognition that I think the ability of people to understand like what the hell you're trying to do in the first place, which is a different matter in itself. But um, so yeah, these are all the things I've observed over the years. In fact, I've often said we should, if we really want to be effective with quote the business and getting quote business value, we should actually stop talking about data and use language that the business stakeholders actually understand. Because you mentioned p values and coefficients and stuff, and like, yeah, cool, do that if you want to sound smart and have everyone hate your guts.
Yeah.
So because they have no idea what you're talking about, that's most people. And if you just want to annoy the living crap out of people, go for that approach.
Rail a meeting for a half hour and never get it back.
Right. And you'll bike shed it too, because you'll bike shed all the stuff, because people, if once you get a bunch of it can go the opposite direction too. Once you get a bunch of data people in a room, and now you're all arguing over p values and whatnot, and if you happen to have any business people there at all, they're just gonna be rolling their eyes and staring at you like you're all insane. And so, yeah, I mean, right time to use the language, and understanding. Again, it comes back to reading the room and understanding who's in there, right? But I think all too often it's, we're putting data on a pedestal when I don't think it needs to be. I think if anything, I think we've overextended on that a bit. So,
Mm, mm. But I do like it on that pedestal.
I like getting things done. So,
Yeah, 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 yeah. And so do you think that like there should be data engineering principles? added to the data scientist curriculum in university, or?
I wouldn't say maybe adding them in, but I would definitely think that. So I always view data along a continuum, along a life cycle. That's part of the notion of the data engineering life cycle in the book, where that's a recognition that data is very much a continuum from when it's created to when it's either archived or destroyed.
Mhm.
And along the way, it mutates into various things depending on the use case and needs. But ultimately, data is never a static thing. And so I would hope that data scientists would at least understand, what happens upstream from them and even upstream from data engineers, right? So we're talking about people who produce data, and not just people, but systems and so forth. It's not just people that do things anymore, but it's a recognition that data has started from somewhere and it's evolved, and once it's in a data scientist's hands, it'll continue to evolve from there, hopefully, and that's just sort of the nature of it. So you need to, I think, understand how to see data in all of its shapes and forms as it arrives to you. And so data engineering is but a part of that. I would also extend that to say you should know how the data that you're getting for your job. I think you should understand, sort of how it was created from the
Yeah.
beginning and understand what happened to it. I mean, at the application level, what happened to it? If you're getting it from a third party, like what is it? Where go and read the API documentation if it's coming from a third party API. But I would say don't take anything for granted. It's like
Mhm.
those are the worst data scientists I see, who just don't question, and don't want to aren't curious about the data that they're using, and the processes and the business rules and the vocabulary and all the other things that went into that data, went into its creation, how it got into your hands. Like what's the lineage of it? What's the steps that it took? I think if you can understand that, that actually solves a lot of your job in some ways, right? Because you have the context. Without that context, like how do you think you're going to do your job?
That's what I was always confused when people were talking about, and I don't know if it's like still a thing because I've always created my own data sets, but for a while, it was talking about like if you're a data scientist, maybe somebody else will create that data set for you and then hand it over to you to model. And I'm like, who even wants that? I don't trust you collecting my data, and I need to know what each of the fields really means so that I'm able to tell you, you know, so that I'm able to explain that model for you. Like if I get
Yeah.
output and it's, well, this variable is a big factor. Well, what does that mean? I don't know what that means if I
Mm.
don't know what the variable is.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, that, again, it goes back to, I think, how students are taught as well. But when I see a data science curriculum, it's typically you're given a very nice data set. It's super clean. If it's malformed at all, it's basically to the extent that that particular data set is malformed. But you need to go back and understand like where it came from, and what it's about, and from there you'll understand the nuance of the data set too, right? I think all too often we take things at face value. It's like, oh, here's my data set. I'm like, cool, all right, it's fine. But in some cases, I mean, obviously there's regulatory stuff. Sometimes you're not supposed to know. That's fine.
Mhm.
But at least if that's the case, you should know about it. Like it's regulated and so forth. But anyway, that's why I feel like data engineering is. If you were to teach data scientists data engineering, at least I would say teach them the core principles, and maybe the life cycle, like we came up with in the book, or at least what a data engineer does and how it impacts your job. I think is also very important, right? All too often we're focused on our particular job and miss the bigger picture. But the best data scientists I've met, and I would say that it's the best people I meet, are the ones who are continuously learning and naturally curious about things. The people I find who are naturally ineffective at everything in life are the ones who are not curious and don't learn new things, and
Data scientist or not, right?
doesn't matter. Yeah, you could be a
Yeah.
plumber and it's like the same thing, right? It's like I don't care what you do for your job. I mean, it's just the people who go far in life are the ones that are constantly challenging themselves and evolving. So mhm.
Mhm. And how did you get your start as a data engineer? Was that something that, you sort of found yourself in, or did
Yeah,
you like wake up one day and say like, I'm going for data engineering?
it didn't really have a term back then. I think it was called software engineering still, right? But I did wake up one day and I was like, I guess I'll have to figure this out. I mean, I think an early example was I was working at a automated machine learning company back in the early 2010s, and this was back when machine learning was still coming back into vogue, after its like 50th millionth winter of but Yeah, I mean, so automated ML, right? Back then, there were barely any ML libraries, let alone, I'd say frameworks. And so, what I kept noticing was, okay, so you got to like, I don't know, hosting models, serving them, and stuff like that. You had to figure that out, and then like processing, like coming up with an automated way for feature processing was a big one. And so I built that, with another guy I was working with, and we were constantly like, so if we're going to automate all this, how do we build this from first principles? Because there wasn't really any back then. There wasn't a context for how to do this, and so that got me thinking. Okay, so the bigger problems, even back then, this is again a long time ago, but it was, the algorithm part was definitely hard, but I felt like the engineering piece was significantly harder,
Yep.
actually. So that was the early realization that engineering was going to play a core role in enabling data science. And then over the years, I kept seeing the same thing over and over and over again. It was just one of those areas where, I'd be hired as a data scientist, come in and, constantly be blocked from a lack of anything, basically. So you're going to have to set up these systems on your own and processes. And I think, for me, I kind of had to learn data engineering on the job because there really wasn't a rubric for it. And I would say until, the book that we wrote, I don't think it was still officially like thought of as a discipline. There were definitely, I think, circumstantial and anecdotal things and articles, but it wasn't like somebody had thought, through what is it from first principles, at least as far as I could tell. Maybe somebody did and I didn't see it, but I wish I would have had that resource back then. Because a lot of the resources you'd find is, how do I learn data engineering? And the resources come back and say, oh, well, you got to learn Spark and Pig and Hadoop and all this stuff. It's like, those are learning tools. That's not learning a discipline. That'd be like saying, how do I learn to become a doctor or a physician? It's like, well, you need to learn how to use a scalpel and how to
And the
apply a
knee
bandage.
thing.
Yeah, how to use an EKG. And it's like that's not describing a discipline. That's just describing a set of things you do. But that's, so I felt like data engineering was really described in a very similar way, where it's very tactical and very, I would say, myopic in that way, right? But that's not the same thing as describing a field, right?
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. Yeah, I think that, right, we see lots of job postings for data engineers. So like it's a thing, and then you get there and it's like, okay, we have these systems that aren't connected. We have, there's plenty of work to do, but this understanding of like, what are the best practices for doing this? Like who has
For
thought
sure.
through this? And, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the same with data scientists, right? Right? If you look up, like, I don't think there's that many resources that teach data science and first principles. Still, data science is very much taught as here's a bunch of ways you can apply various algorithms and analytical techniques to different types of data sets. But to me, that's still not the essence of what data science is, right? It's to me, data science is nothing more than using the power of either human or machine generated insights to leverage data for valuable purposes. And so but teaching somebody that from first principles is actually, I think, challenging, right? And it's not really done that well. The number of new data scientists I talk to, and it's quite a number of people who come out that are just like, oh yeah, I know TensorFlow or PyTorch or whatever, right? And if you look at job listings too, it's the same way. That the job listings are pretty terrible, I think, for a lot of data science positions, because it's like, well, you have to have a master's in such and such degree, and you got to know 50 years with PyTorch or some stupid thing like that, and it's but nowhere in those descriptions is there like you have to be good at communicating and requirements gathering and all this other stuff, which is what you typically do on the job. But so anyway, that's my soapbox for that.
Yeah, no, and I do see every once in a while, I do see a good data scientist job listing. But yeah, the majority.
But where are those jobs usually located at, right? Those are usually jobs where like they have a really strong data team, they have a really strong data culture, and they've
already got a strategy. They've already got
Yep.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, and they kind of know what they're doing with it. I see it a lot, but it's like the challenge is really bridging that gap between the the companies that are really killing with data, and typically those are the ones that started with it from day one, or at least had a a use case with a digital native, data native. The ones who struggle with it are, I think, the companies that are maybe a bit more mature that are trying to shoehorn it into processes and in their workflows. And it can certainly be done. I mean, I was at, like I'll call it a good example. I think that they're public and whatnot, but like Chick-fil-A is a really good example of a company that I recently visited where they're doing great things with data and they're executing on all cylinders, but they also have a culture where, to the T, it's like one of the strongest cultures I've ever seen for a company.
Mhm.
And they just sort of, they, everyone knows why they're there and, the values of the company. And so they're able to execute and there's not really any question about what you're there for. Right. And so it's a bit different.
What did you really like about their cultural values?
I like the fact that, I mean, to be fair, I think Chick-fil-A might be a bit, still polarizing for some people from a cultural standpoint. But that notwithstanding, if you work there, you know why you're working there, right? They have the values instilled from Truett Cathy, the founder of the company, and he was very adamant about the principles that Chick-fil-A stands for, right? And it's very family oriented, and I think it's no secret they're also a faith-based organization, and I think that that. For that particular type of person that wants to work there, those values align with that particular type of person and that group, and it works really, really well. Like they actually get these. I've never seen anything like it, to be frank. Everyone I talk to, they're like, "Oh, I love it here." And I'm like, at first I thought it was all ruse. Then I'm like, no, everyone here is genuinely like they believe in the mission of what they're trying to do, and and that's cool. And you can see that just how it manifests itself and success they're having. I mean, they're the largest grossing fast food chain in the world, I believe. And
I mean, they make amazing chicken, so
it's good. It helps that they also have a really good product, right? But yeah, so I mean, but for projects to work there, what I noticed is just people are very aligned. It just seems to things to click. I mean, maybe there's some friction beneath the scenes, but it's nothing like what I'd see at other companies where like nobody knows why the hell they're there and culture's not aligned, and so the ingredients for making stuff work, I think, really comes down to not just the team that you're working on, but also the general context and the sort of the broader culture that you sit within. Obviously, you can be successful, and I think there are definitely companies that are successful with data in spite of themselves. There's popular tech companies out there that were notorious for having toxic cultures and whatnot, but because I think they were data first, you can make things work. But were people happy working there? Probably not, but that's a different subject. So, but anyway, it's a bit of a tangent, but I think an important one. Right. So
yeah, no. I've really been enjoying this. And so you've mentioned your book a couple times. Do you want to just give us the overview of your book with Matt?
Yeah, Matt Housley and I, we wrote Fundamentals of Data Engineering. Came out late last year, a bit over a year ago.
I meant to bring it down before I asked you because
don't worry about it. Actually, I don't have it here. Actually, I have another O'Reilly book. Actually, about done with my friend's book, Generative Deep Learning here, but I thought this was my book. All O'Reilly books look the same. We'll pretend that's Fundamentals of Data Engineering. So the so the book really is about the print. I think from first principles, what is data engineering? But we try and represent it in a way that is not likely to change in the next 5 to 10 years, right? So we intentionally, when we started to write the book, we didn't want to write a book on data engineering on AWS or on any platform. We didn't think that would be relevant to what we're trying to do, nor would it stand the test of time, right? And so the book really dives into sort of things that are immutable. So things like getting data from source systems and storing it and ingesting it and querying it and transforming it and modeling it and finally serving it to downstream stakeholders. But along the way, there's what we call undercurrents, right? So things like security, right? So when we were writing the book, we're like, well, where would something like security fit in? Is that, do we write a standalone chapter on this? Or when we realize, okay, so there's certain things that undercut the whole life cycle, data engineering, and not just data engineering, I'd say, but all data stuff like security.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's the whole pipeline.
Yeah. So, but it's one of those things we can't ignore, right? So data management's another one, and same with orchestration and, other undercurrents. And so we really felt like that framework, sort of cross-sectional framework really helped identify or provide a rubric for us to think about data engineering. And, and apparently it resonated well. It's still selling. It's still a bestseller. think it's probably going to be doing that for a while. And in fact, if anything, I think the interest keeps growing in it. I mean, the number of book clubs that we see popping up around it, both at companies and just through various communities and whatnot, it just keeps growing. So it's really cool to see those ideas take off in the wild. But that's the essence of the book, really. It's just what are the fundamentals of data engineering. So
yeah. Ooh, are you going to, so I know you teach too. Are you going to be using it as the text for your course?
I do teach. It depends where you ask me where I'm teaching at. So I teach at the University of Utah. I think due to the success of the book, we're actually too busy to teach though right now. And so we're actually advising another professor, Matt Pescock, on the syllabus, and we'll come into some guest lectures, but we're definitely I think I have a vested interest in making sure the course is great. But I think due to the success of the course, I mean, it's a question of can I impact 50 to 100 students at a time, or can I impact millions, right? And so the millions number is where I'm most interested at right now. And so yeah. So where am I teaching right now? It's like got a course coming out on O'Reilly soon. Got I would say a massive course coming out on a to be announced course on a major MOOC, which I will let you guess who that is, but it's I think it has the potential to impact millions of students once that's launched. And I think just that's sort of my goal right now. It's just due to the success of the book. I think that if you're lucky enough to have that success, right, it's an impact. Then it's like a question of where.
How do you optimize it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big question, right? I mean, but it's something you don't think about when the book comes, when you're writing the book, because you want to just finish the book. But if your book takes off, and hopefully for you, maybe it does at some point, or some piece of content or something you're doing, or anyone in the audience, right? But if you are lucky or unlucky enough to have lightning trapped in a bottle, you got to figure out how you're going to use it, right? And so teaching is one of these things where I feel it's that's one reason that we decided to get out of services, really, right? Because you're trying to avoid the one-to-one solution, right? You reach a point where you have to try to do one-to-many.
Yeah.
And the many is, it's a almost infinitely scalable number, right? But it's capped at the number of people who could possibly be interested in, so total addressable market of your field. But that changes too, I would say. That's how it is, and so. Yeah, so if you ask where I'm teaching or what I'm teaching, that's kind of what I'm doing. So,
no, and that's a great answer. I think that like a lot of people too can benefit from just like hearing the honest answer that you're thinking strategically about how you're going to be using your time, and how to best put yourself out there to the world, because people can use that even for themselves as well when they think about their own journeys.
Oh yeah, it's hugely important. It's something where I feel bad. I mean, there's definitely cases where I'll still, depending on the circumstances, still talk to people on a one-on-one basis. But it's just I'm extremely sapped for time, and I don't have enough bandwidth to help everyone individually, and that's just the reality of it. So, but it is what it is. So
And then, so you shared that you guys are moving to workshops. Would you say that that's like the next big thing for you? Is there anything else that you're like working on and excited about?
For Ternary, definitely. I think workshops are going to be more and more of what we're trying to do. We spent the last year, I think this year, 2023, just sort of assessing like, what's happening, with our brand, what's happening with, the book, and with our schedules. And I think, workshops is definitely an area where Matt and I sort of intersect, uniquely. And so workshops is definitely something we're leaning more into, especially going into next year. I've been on a perpetual speaking tour. So it's like, it's hard for me to also do workshops. So I'll start setting aside more time for those. But I also feel like for areas where Matt and I don't intersect, I mean, my goal is right now, courses, books, working on a new book on data modeling. So that'll be out early 2024, hopefully. Just other projects like that. I think that, my groove right now is just writing books, creating courses on top of those, probably doing workshops, and then rinse and repeat. And
are you thinking about a second book?
I'm already writing it. Yeah.
Woo! Tell us about that.
Well, it's about data modeling. And so I think after Fundamentals of Data Engineering was written and published. In the back of my head, I was thinking, okay, so where do I feel I could have done a better job? And I think the chapter on data modeling was definitely one of them, where I think it gave it an okay perspective. I also feel like it's one of those topics that's vastly underrated, but also just vast in terms of size. But it's also underappreciated by, I would say, anyone who touches data, in particular software engineers, for example. Right? Not even talking about data people, but just software engineers, and those are the people you rely upon to get your data, by the way, typically. Right? But the arts of data modeling, I feel, across the data lifecycle have been largely ignored, forgotten, or misinterpreted. And so the whole goal of the book is to really, show you all the various techniques, along the data lifecycle, and also, catching the field up with things like machine learning, streaming, and, I would say other advancements across the board, NoSQL databases, and so forth. But so it's really starting for first principles, like, how do you learn to see, the organization you're in, and the ways that data may, interplay with the various rules and information flows and logic and definitions and so forth, right? Then working down to, okay, so how do I represent this in, in terms of maybe a data storage system or something, right? That could be a database, but anymore, there's other ways of storing data too. There's, object storage, and there's machine learning models and so forth, right? And so it's like, so it's looking at data really as again, as I pointed out earlier, a continuum, right? And the various things that happen to data, how does it mutate, and why does it mutate, and so forth. So I'm taking what is a very unopinionated, view of data through its life cycle, and providing you with the various techniques to model data, as well as making you aware of all the trade-offs, right? I think at the end of the day, I call it mixed model arts, like mixed martial arts, but the notion is, instead of it's a bit of a play. You'll see my talk in London, but it's a notion that there's not really one true way. I think that part of the issue with the world of data we're in right now, and no matter where you go, is everyone has an opinion about the one true way. And I say, you just, as long as you're aware of the different techniques, like use what works for your situation, but you need to be aware of the techniques. Just like if you're in mixed martial arts, like you need to know I would say at least the standard techniques of boxing, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling. If you don't know that stuff positionally, as as an athlete, in that sport, you're if you don't know any one of those things, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage, right? But with the MMA matches have a way of kind of going any direction. You need to be ready to respond and wherever it goes. And I feel like data practitioners, again, whether your application or analysts or machine learning, you need to be competent in much the same way. Because here's the deal: it's like, I think a lot, and going forward, a lot of the divide between software, data, ML, it's going to be coming down, right? The feedback loop between all these things is
for sure. No, that's literally why I reached out to Chad, is because I can see how, and even years ago we saw data scientist roles where the job description listed sort of like everything, and it's like, well, what do you mean? But then at the same time, we've had like advancements in AutoML and all of the things that sort of also make, right, you now have like more tools to learn, but we've got data versioning and experiment tracking and monitoring models in production, right? So we've got like best practices that actually make certain things easier, because now you're not losing time trying to track down a data set that you can't find, and you're not like losing, spending a ton of time manually trying to figure out which model was the best, because you've just got this beautiful display and you just look at it and you can look at all the metrics you care about and you're like, okay, right, this one, right? So in certain ways, things are getting easier, but it's also getting more difficult because we've got more tools, more things, and things are just also moving really fast. And so I'm really interested to hear, I love asking people, sort of, do you see the scope of the data scientist role getting bigger, or do you see it becoming just, like these, scope stays the same, but the knowledge goes deeper? Like, how are you thinking about how the data scientist role might change over time? Sorry.
It's a good question. Because I think it depends on I think it depends where your organization is too, right? In terms of
course,
maturity and whatnot. there's a couple ways this could go, I suppose. Like data science, I think, again, it comes back to the notion of data disappearing entirely, right? And I think that is one scenario where data scientists become so embedded and so ingrained in a particular business process that it's like just take it for granted. And you're not a data scientist; you're just somebody who enables a business, and that to me
Widespread
is like an
data
ideal.
literacy.
Yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
right. But on the other hand, yeah, it could go. I think it depends on what happens in the periphery, right? Data science is sort of this weird thing where I think it's like with the worlds of ML analytics, it sort of collided with data science. Back in the day, I think data science more was about machine learning, at least be more related to that, but now it's encompassed everything. And
Mhm.
so I'm confused about what it means in the first place. But if you go back to my definition originally of leveraging data to you know um, get insights and more utility out of your data, then I suppose that's um, if that definition holds, and I suppose it is, however you want to make it happen, right? But in terms of the broader world of data, I suppose I think it is intersecting. It will continue to intersect more closely with software, with you know everything. I think because as applications become more quote data powered
Mhm.
and also more real time, the consequences that the feedback loop between everything shrinks to the point where it's um, there are no distinctions, right? Or the
Mhm.
distinctions you have are very, I would say, arbitrary.
Mhm.
So that's the other way I could go. So I think it ultimately depends on like, but if you're not if you're at a company where data powered applications is a thing, then sure, it becomes more like that scenario where it's all intertwined. If you're not at a company where that happens, and you're just doing kind of back office work and whatnot, then I guess it depends on how ingrained you could be with the business. So
Right. Right. And like you said, I mean, and I like but dislike whenever people give like statistics about data science in general. And it's just like, well, who are you talking about? Are you
that's
talking
just
about
it.
businesses that have like their databases in Excel, or are we talking about,
Yeah.
right? And it's such and like size has such an impact, right? And the bigger companies are always like a little bit smaller to move because they're already so siloed. So this idea of having a real blend and taking on more
Mhm.
of the pipeline becomes more difficult at these larger companies that are already like
Yeah.
well established in their process. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
I just can't
This
help thinking about it though.
it is interesting. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see where it all goes too. I mean, it could be none of the above. Um, so whatever that looks like, I'm not sure, but I mean,
Mhm.
that's just sort of the consequence, right? I mean, none of us, I think, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, could have saw the popularity of generative AI. I mean, there were definitely glimpses of it, but it's not like anyone said, "Yo, in 2022, like late 2022, like obviously somebody's going to put an HTML form in front of GPT-3, and that'll just be a game-changing way of interfacing with large language models." And GPT-3 had been around for several years or a few years at least, but it took the I was kind of joking with Matt. It's funny because every time you put a form in front of something and keep the interface pretty simple, you get something like that's what happened with Google, right?
Mhm.
Google is like extremely underwhelming as a visually as a product. It's like that's it. It's like, yeah, we'll type something in it and see what you get. And it's the same thing with the Chat GPT. It just blew the doors open. So, um, but inevitably, it seems like it's a user UX or UI type thing that changes things because it brings it open to the masses, right? Same
Mhm.
thing with phones, and so
Mhm.
so who knows what happens next? I don't know. I mean, I think we're definitely at an interesting inflection point as an industry where, and we talked about the value conversation earlier. I think that's the other piece where, as I've been writing, I feel like if we're not going to do all the stuff that we've been talking about as an industry for decades, right? So getting governance under control, getting good data quality, all the modeling, all this fun stuff. It's like with all the attention being paid onto the industry right now, with the generative AI and everything else and all the budgets and so forth, like we ain't going to get it done now. What are you waiting for?
When are you going to
Like,
do
when are
it?
you going to do it? I don't know. So I would say this will be a very interesting time because if you can get it right now, cool. If you can't, like, what are you going to wait for the next hype cycle to do all these things you've been moaning about for the past?
Well, maybe the next hype cycle will be even cooler.
It will be, yeah. But the thing is like all the fundamentals still are tough to do:
No.
governance, quality, modeling, and all this stuff. And it's like this is key to making these large language models, for example, work in a corporate setting. I mean, corporate data sets are an absolute hellscape for the most part. I can the question I always ask my audience is when I talk to them is, If I ask you, if your boss, okay, well, let me frame it a different way. If I asked you to put a large language model on top of your corporate data sets, would you bet your job on it working?
I mean, I wouldn't. What do they say?
Well, nobody raises their hand. Of course they're not. Right? Some people do, I mean, if they're doing
Yeah,
it, but the thing is
yeah.
that, but it's like most people, I think, shutter it. So, I mean, it goes back to the basic recognition that BI is still hard. And, you're going to throw a large language model on top of this and expect it to like solve all your problems.
Mhm.
It's a bit, it's a bit fantasy land, but here we are. And this is time to get it right. If we can't get it right now, like I'm like, well, when are you going to do it? Like,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
when you feel like it. So I don't know. I'm a cranky old man, Kristen. So
I mean, I can get pretty cranky with you. Okay, so a question that I always love to end with, if you were going to speak with a data scientist about some area where they could upskill, what would you suggest? And are there any resources that you can think of?
I would definitely say learning to communicate with quote the business and stakeholders. And so good resources. I mean, there's plenty of I would say don't read data books. Actually, I think those are kind of a waste of time. Like I mean, it's good, but you need to learn like
Right, you're
quote
saying
business
data book,
literacy, right? So understand the domain that you're operating in. And so if you're working with a marketing team, like understand what they want, understand the terminology, understand the what's important to the stakeholders, right? I think that's key. Learn the vocabulary and start talking the vocabulary. Use your data speak to talk to other data nerds. Otherwise, nobody cares, right?
yeah.
Of course, when it makes sense, try and educate them on the quote business and what you're doing. I think it goes both ways, but it's your job to really become fluent in the domain that you're working in, and that only comes from, I think, just learning how to observe and ask questions and just see how things work, and having a sense of humility with it,
Mhm.
and just being open minded. Yeah.
No, I love that. And sometimes too, it's that I don't think people always get that, like, if I'm doing a new modeling project at work, I'm going to sit down at my desk and I'm going to think about how I'm going to explain this in words that are really simple. And it might not include like a big Google search. It's just me taking the time to figure out how I think that another person who is non-technical is going to understand what I'm saying. And I don't think that like um, that necessarily is something that everyone thinks about, is just that like these
Mm-hmm.
things actually do take time. They don't just happen magically. You do have to sit down and think about how you want to present and communicate that
Yep.
information. And it doesn't mean that you're not a bad communicator. It just means you haven't sat down yet and thought about this one particular problem and how you're going to share it.
Well, yeah, I always tell people data is a thinking person's sport, right? It's different in the sense where you're trying to think through just how everything interconnects and how it relates, and it's just a hard thing to do, and be able to communicate that in the best possible way and leverage all your skills. It's a hard thing to do. I've been thinking a lot about this too. I know you have to take off in a bit, but it's like whether agile is appropriate for a profession like ours.
Mm-hmm.
If you're because the way agile is typically used nowadays is it's you're forced to operate in sprints, and I don't think sprints are good for thinking. It's almost antithetical because it's now you're forced to cram, right? I think you should do sprints when it's time to deliver products. So I think early on, it's almost better to throw that away for a bit and maybe give yourself a bit of a, I wouldn't say a sabbatical, but give yourself the proper time to come up with the best ideas, because that's what you're getting paid for, is your ideas, and then your ability to execute on those ideas. But if you can't, if you're forced to rush through ideas, what do you think you're going to get at the end of the day?
Yeah,
Right.
I have had good experience being embedded on squads.
Nice.
But I don't want to elaborate on that a ton because I do need to go. But so
Yeah.
if anyone wants to find and follow you, where are the best places to look you up?
Yeah, obviously for Ternary Data, go to ternarydata.com. We'll have advertisements for our workshops very soon. That's a good shill for that. Fundamentals of Data Engineering, you can find that on Amazon or O'Reilly or wherever fine books are sold. For me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm just search for me. I'm not that hard to find. Then you can find me at joereis.substack.com, where I rant aimlessly on a weekly basis about data, provide links, articles I'm interested in, and there's going to be a new subset coming soon on data modeling. It's under the working title Practical Data Modeling, and so that's something to keep an eye out for. I think that's very likely what I'm going to be releasing early chapters of the book, as well as building out community-related efforts and materials as well. So, and then courses coming out. Like I said, to be announced. Stay tuned on that. But yeah, it's hard not to find me. I would say you'll find me. My name's There's a marathoner out there, ultra marathoner named Joe Reis, but he's like my domain name. But yeah, apart from that, it's fine. I don't run ultras. So.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Joe, for coming and sharing today. I really enjoyed chatting with you.
Anytime.
All right, bye.